Hi, this is Misha, and I'll probably entitle this something like The Road to Warp. Of course, as usual, told with Eagle Moss ships. Hey, I've got to get my money out of them somehow, right? But honestly, this is what attracted me to these little models, was just how many they've done in all of, frankly, very nice quality. Keep in mind, I'm thinking back to the days of the old Micro Machines and some pretty crummy models that were in stores at the time, and yeah. So yeah, I thought I'd kind of line out the ships from pre-warp to the Enterprise, and then we'll pick up there in a different episode. First up, we have an advanced space shuttle, kind of an orbital craft. Basically, it's based on the Venture Star experimental craft that never went into production, the X-131, or perhaps the X-139. Then, of course, we have Cochrane's Phoenix, which, it's a small ship, but I have to assume it had at least a minibar in it. It just kind of seems kind of a thing. Also, how the heck did it land? I understood how it took off, the idea of being a rocket, sure, okay, but how'd they get back down to Earth? Next, we have a ship that was in the beginning of Enterprise. It doesn't really exactly have a straight name, although it's kind of become known as the Emmette, or SS Emmette Type. Then we have another ship that never had an official name. It's usually just called the Warp Delta, or the Delta, although unofficially it's sometimes called the Ganges class. And some people think of it as basically a refit or updated version of that Emmette. Next up, we have probably my favorite because it looks so different. This is, again, not officially named, but we know at least one ship was called the Intrepid. So the Intrepid Type or class fits. And then finally, we'll wrap this episode up with the Enterprise NX-01, which was Earth's first Warp 5 ship. Say what you will about Enterprise, I really like a lot of ship designs from it, and that's one reason when I first found out that Eagle Moss was doing ships and then they were doing ones like these is really what attracted me to it. It's kind of the oddball ships that, and they're doing the complete set as well. So a notation on warp for anyone who may not know. Warp 1 is light speed, speed of light. Then warp 2 is double that, so twice. Warp 3 would be double that, so 4 times. And then warp 4 would be double that, so 8 times. And then warp 5 will be double that, 16. You get the idea. It's a geometric progression. That's why going up one warp scale is important. Again, all fiction, guys, but at least it lets you know warp 5 doesn't mean just 5 times the speed of light. That would still be terribly slow, because, some of the nearest stars to us are 4, 5, 6 light years off, so even at warp 5, if it was just 5 times light, we'd be getting there in a year. Alrighty, so how did we get from, the beginning here to warp speed? Well, the ship here like I said, it's an advanced space shuttle. It looks like it probably has the ability to take off and land without the need for boosters, which is an improvement over our space shuttle. This is called STS-165, which is in keeping with our current naming conventions for space shuttles. I like the model, that it's big, has good feel to it. You'll notice it's kind of low on detail. That's because this was taken from the intro to Enterprise, in which it was never really fleshed out completely, because it was only seen in passing, but since it was in the intro, it was pretty much in every episode to speak of. I think it was even in the Mirror Universe one. So even though it was kind of just seen in passing, it was seen in passing quite a bit. And that's pretty interesting. It's seen docking to the ISS or something like the International Space Station, so this would be theoretically the next step from our current space shuttle, which, as you know, has been retired for over half a decade now. A fact that still kind of depresses me, but so it goes. We don't know when this came into service, but it's safe to say in the maybe 2030s or 2040s. And then we have Zephyrin Cochrane's Phoenix here, his warp ship prototype from First Contact. This was only capable of Warp 1. It was built from a Titan 5, which would be an advanced intercontinental ballistic missile. A neat concept for a lot of reasons, reasonably realistic. The warp nacelles were retracted into the side during launch and then deployed in space. It was propelled by a typical chemical engine in the back. Interesting that even though it was capable of light speed thanks to warp drive, it still relied on chemical means for subwarp. And again, how the hell did they get back to Earth? They really showed that. Because they were back in Montana, so they wouldn't have splashed down in the ocean. And if the front disconnected, since they said the full Phoenix was in the Smithsonian, how did they get the back part, the warp part? I'm sure they would want to have inspected the warp engines. Sorry, just nitpicking, guys. I'm not too big. I mean, it's not even something I thought about when we saw this in the theater, but it's kind of fun just to think about it. So that was the first, and of course that was pretty much a one-off experimental craft, capable again of just Warp 1. Now what I think is neat, I'm going to set this back here, with our Emmette type here, also seen in the beginning of Enterprise. We're pretty much taking the general hull shape of this shuttle, kind of triangular delta shape, and we're slapping warp engines on it, which is really neat. So it has that lineage of still having been a space shuttle. In fact, it still has chemical engines in the back. So it does not have impulse. We're still using actual rockets. Pretty much taking a body and throwing engines, warp engines on it. We could hope that it was capable of more than Warp 1, but it probably wasn't capable of much more than that. Maybe 1.5, even just 1.3. Don't know. Again, this was in the intro. We never had an official name. Sometimes it's been called Moon Shuttle, because we see it flying over the moon, or in the Mirror Universe episode attacking the moon. So we know it had weaponry. Probably just plasma cannons at that point. Seems like it was about 130 meters long. Probably had a crew of maybe 25 or 30. It's just funny to think that we were still using chemical engines for sublight, and then we had warp drive. But, you know, you think about it in the evolution, in some ways technologies are like that. Big advances, but then some of the older stuff stays around for some time. And these would have come into service probably late 21st century, so in our century we need to get on it. We don't have that many years left, guys, to get warp drive figured out. We need to quit bickering about all the pointless BS and get to work on warp drive. Come on, we made iPhones work because of Star Trek, so let's get on that. Next up, we have the Warp Delta, or if we want to call it the Ganges class. I thought it was super neat that Eagle Moss did this ship. essentially, it's the same as the Moon Shuttle or Emmette Type. The hull is a little bit different. Some people think this is just a upgraded version, but I don't think so. It's a little too different. It has more details. This was actually seen on the show in episodes. It was in the last episode of Season 2. It defended Earth, so it was obviously still in service in the early 2150s, but probably was an aging design at that point. We saw that it had phase cannons, so probably better weaponry, but we didn't see any evidence of torpedoes. And we can pretty much assume that it's got a little better warp engines, because the engines on this Emmette look a little more crude compared to this. So, I mean, we could just speculate that it's capable of maybe warp 2, or since we saw it traveling maybe a little faster, maybe, warp 2.5 or even 3. And of course, Star Trek has a habit of, or Starfleet, really, in the universe, has a habit of upgrading. Now, something we need to note, these would not have had transporters for humans, for living cargo. So they would have had to have had a decent shuttle bay, with at least a few different shuttlecraft and transport craft. Otherwise, you're not going to get people on and off. But yeah, we see a nice lineage from a space shuttle through these, just throwing the engines on from the Phoenix. Now, we're starting to get into something that sort of kind of looks like a Star Trek ship, Federation ship that we would recognize. This is the Intrepid Type, as I said. Honestly, it's one of my favorite Eagle Moss models. It's made well, nicely detailed, sturdy. This was also in the last episode of Season 2, Defending Earth. There was this ship, which we later found out was named the Intrepid. And it had 2 of the Delta ships with it. It definitely seemed like the more powerful of the 3 ships. It had torpedoes as well as phase cannons. It seemed like it was a little bigger. Call it 370 meters. 300. Sorry, late guys. 160 to 170 meters. So we would assume it has a larger crew, maybe 40 or 50. Now, it has these huge engines. It's very likely these may not have been the original warp nacelles. It's possible, say, this came into service in, 2130, 2140, and then as warp technology progressed, they took off the original proportional nacelles and added those to give it faster speed. We definitely know it's not as fast as Warp 5. We can assume that it's somewhere between 3 and 4. I really think the design is fun. I like the half saucer. It's got very noticeable shuttle bay, which is good. Again, we need this. We still don't have a transporter probably certified for humans on this. The other thing I think is weird are these little fins. Yeah, kind of odd. I think they just put them on to make it look different, but it's funny. Kind of reminds me of Homer Simpson and his speed holes. It's not as dirty as it sounds, I promise. You do have a deflector in the front here, little cut. Shouldn't have pointed you there. But yeah, you can tell I really like this ship. And it would reappear in several episodes. It would be in Season 3 and even in 4. So this was kind of the first probably long-range ship, whereas the first 2, the Emmette and the Ganges type, were probably just for close systems and nearby colonies, more patrol ships. This could have actually been more of a transport, maybe short-range exploration defense. It just seems more of a multi-purpose ship, and since it survived all those years in the Twilight alternate reality fighting against the Xindi, we can assume that it's reasonably tough and durable. But really, that led directly to our Enterprise of the series, our star, which was being launched in the first episode. Interesting story. When they were still kind of figuring out Enterprise as a series, they wanted to do something different, which I wish they really had done. They were going to actually have this still being built for the first several episodes, maybe even half of the first season. I think that would have been neat, just to change up the format. That was my main problem with Enterprise, especially the first season, 2 seasons. It was just the same old formula, and by that point, for multiple reasons, we really needed to change up a formula. But I do like the ship. A lot of people say it looks like the Akira. It harkens back, but I don't think it's too bad. I think it's its own design, and of course the Akira is a favorite. In theory, using something like the Daedalus class with the ball, or even like the ring ship, would have been neat just for continuity, but let's be honest, neither of those designs would look very nice as a hero ship. And this is still very much identifiable as an Enterprise. It has the saucer, and it's the first we see with the full, complete saucer. We do have the engines upswept. We don't have the lower section, the engineering drive. It's all housed. This would be the largest ship we've seen yet, at over 200 meters. It would have a crew of 80 to 100. It certainly had the capacity, because we know originally it had 80 to 82, but then they put Makos on board, and there was obviously room for those folks, so we can assume there was at least a couple of dozen Makos. So we can say that it had room for up to 100. There, and again, guys, sometimes I wish I had 2 hands and I'm doing this. Make my life a little easier. It originally launched with spatial torpedoes, and that was pretty much it. They did not even have pulse weapons, or, energy weapons, I should say. They actually built phase cannons, 3 of them, 2 forward-facing and one aft-facing in Season 1. They had 1 prototype on board, and they used it to retrofit others. Boy, this is not as easy to do as the other one. Sorry, it's a small little thing, guys. Oh, well. Boop, boop, boop. And originally I had the spatial torpedoes, and these were upgraded to photonic torpedoes at the end of Season 2, when Enterprise went back to Earth after the Xindi attack. So we know it could handle photonic torpedoes, which is kind of the name game that Enterprise played. Not photon torpedoes, photonic. But at least they started off with so-called spatial torpedoes. This is capable of warp 5, although in theory, really, in practice, it went up to warp 4.5, but later upgrades, they would push it past that. This was also the first to have a transporter certified for, humans, living cargo. Still had shuttle pods. It was originally designed as a deep space explorer survey craft, although it was capable later of combat. Although, interestingly, at the beginning, it was very not capable of combat. They were really kind of caught with their pants down, frankly. And thus gets into the Enterprise. Like I said, from here I'll probably do an episode kind of looking at the evolution of the Enterprise itself, all the different series, but I thought it'd be fun just to look at the evolution of kind of warp drive and all that. Why not? I had fun anyway. Hope you did too. Just having, all this. But I think it's funny that it's interesting that there's a continuity of sorts. It's always nice when fictitious universes have some effort at some kind of history. Those who know me, I'm a historian, and I like mechanical things and evolutions and models, so why not? And we know that more than a few of the Enterprise NX-01 types were made. We know that Columbia was launched a few years later. I thought it was very nice that they named it after the Space Shuttle Columbia. And we can presume that a few more were put out. Well, if you liked, please comment. Love chalking below. Any questions, feel free to hit me up. And, we have other videos on these ships doing different little lineups. And I will do individual reviews too. So, appreciate you tuning in. And I will catch you next time.